Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host for this week, Matt Addison. Keifer MacDonald is alongside me. We're going to talk through a few general topics. Darwin Nunez will come up on the conversation. Szoboszlai as well, after Liverpool went to Girona and won 1-0 in the Champions League. Arne Slot wasn't particularly happy. We'll get into that as well. And have a look at the rest of the season in terms of what could stop Liverpool from winning the Premier League and the Champions League from the position that they currently find themselves in. Before that, though, don't forget to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan. You can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link also gives you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link with all of the information on that is in the podcast episode description box below. We'll get straight into it, though, Keifer. We'll talk through last night first. In terms of the Girona game, we just mentioned before we came on air that it wasn't the most interesting game to watch. Liverpool did win it, but Arne Slot wasn't particularly happy. Can you understand those comments at the end where he said, yes, the result was good, but the performance wasn't?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen from Slot's kind of early days now at Liverpool that he's a bit of a disciplinarian, isn't he? And obviously he kind of instills those high standards. Liverpool are top of the Premier League and top of the Champions League for a reason. It's no coincidence. And that obviously all comes from the manager and kind of the mentality he's trying to, instill and keep bright. So I think, whilst a lot of people would have looked at it last night and saw, well, Liverpool 6 out of 6 in the Champions League. And by the time this goes out, Matt, they could be qualified for the round of 16, depending on what happens on Wednesday night. I think there was a few things that were, I think a lot of people would have picked up on, that weren't, the Liverpool that we've seen in the early weeks of the season and more recently as well in wins against Manchester City and Real Madrid. But I think that was kind of to be expected as well. I mean, given Liverpool was so far clear at the top of the Champions League, I do wonder if there was a few players maybe playing with the handbrake on. I thought the midfield looked leggy and the press wasn't there as well. But I do wonder subconsciously if a few players maybe had their eyes on Saturday's game against Fulham, obviously in the Premier League, which is where Liverpool's kind of bread and butter at the minute. That's the kind of the aim for this season, with especially how strong they started. I think a lot of people expected Slot to rotate, and he didn't really do that. So, whether that was because there was no game at the weekend in Merseyside derby, and he kind of wanted to get some rhythm into the legs ahead of that game against Fulham. But as I say, I think he referenced the pressing and the intensity that wasn't really there. I think Szoboszlai was one of the few kind of players who kind of demonstrated the intensity that we've seen on a week-to-week basis, but in terms of getting that support and that backup, it wasn't really there, and obviously that allowed Girona to play through Liverpool quite easily, and especially in the first half they had a lot of chances, didn't they? And I don't think anyone expected that, given was Girona 20th or 24th in the league, or maybe a bit lower, maybe 30th or something in the standings before I think of kick-off yesterday. So obviously they hadn't played that well in the Champions League so far. They did well in La Liga last year, but they lost a lot of players. So I think they were testing Addison so early into his comeback, you can see why Slot was alarmed. But at the end of the day, I think, when you can kind of compete on all fronts as Liverpool are at the minute, not every performance can be a 9 out of 10, a 10 out of 10. What we saw against Real Madrid and what we saw against Manchester City, or even that 3-0 win that we saw at United right at the start of the season. So I think I can understand why Slot is not getting carried away with the win, and he's, there'll be a few things, as I said, that he wasn't happy with. But I think, from the outside looking in, 6 wins from 6 in the Champions League, this new format as well, unprecedented. I think it's, continues this really strong start for Liverpool, and it sets them up quite nicely for the weekend. They've had the break now, having not played the Merseyside derby. They've got some rhythm back in the legs, and hopefully they can, continue to keep winning in the Premier League on Saturday.
Yeah, to me, it felt more like a performance where they just basically did just about enough to win the game. They weren't in complete control, which I think is probably where Arne Slot is coming from when he says he wasn't happy with the performance. We know that that's the key buzzword, really, with the way that he plays, and that's the key difference, really, between last season and this, is that Liverpool this season have tended to keep the ball a bit better, to be a little bit more patient, not to lose it in dangerous situations. And they did that a couple of times, but I have to say I was never fully convinced with, Bryan Hill and a couple of the players that Girona have got. You always felt like Liverpool would be able to deal with that. It felt more to me like Liverpool just got over the line and did enough. They probably were always going to score a goal. Obviously, it comes from the penalty spot, but you'd think that, at some point in that second half, someone would find a way through and be able to score. Likelihood it was always going to be Mohamed Salah, which it was. But I suppose the comments from Slot possibly come more from getting ahead of complacency, the position that Liverpool are in, the status that they've got in the league and the Champions League now. It almost felt a bit to me more like he was taking the opportunity when they've won to criticise them. A bit like when, the Liverpool wins, but you sort of criticise the referee because you think, well, it's a nice time to be able to do that. You almost feel like you've got a bit more leniency to do that. It felt almost a bit like that to me, where Liverpool have won, fantastic, another clean sheet, 6 out of 6 in Europe, but we want a little bit more on top of that as well. It almost felt a bit to me more like it was a message for the future rather than that particular game in isolation, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you touched on it right at the start then about control, and I think as you said, there was a complete lack of it last night. It was, I think if you were to kind of show someone, who'd maybe been in a coma for 6 or 7 years, the performance, they probably would have said it was a Jurgen Klopp team, because that was kind of what it felt like. It was, a very basketball match kind of like, wasn't it? It was very end to end, and Slot said that so many times that he just doesn't like that. He doesn't like surrendering possession for the sake of it, forcing passes. And Liverpool seemed to do that last night. And as I say, part of that would have been a bit of complacency. The players know that, even if they were to have lost or drawn last night, there wasn't too much jeopardy at stake because of the lead they've built up in the Champions League over the last 5 games. But as you say, it was a real good chance for Slot to kind of send a message out and just ensure that those standards don't slip, because, you look at the games Liverpool have got coming up, especially away from home before the end of the year now. There are some really tough games there, and there hasn't really been too much to fault with Liverpool in these early weeks of the season. They have been so good. So as you say, this was almost like a perfect opportunity to kind of iron out some of those, the sloppy bits that maybe crept into some of the games. But as I say, it felt like Liverpool very much played with the handbrake on last night. They kind of knew they were the better team. They knew they probably would have had the quality if push comes to shove kind of thing. But I think even if they hadn't have got that penalty, I would have backed them to still find a way through. As you say, they had so many quality players on the pitch last night. I know the bench wasn't as strong as it maybe has been in recent weeks, but in that starting 11 alone, Diaz, Nunes, Salah. I know Nunes didn't have his best games, but he had plenty of chances. On another night, it could have been 3 or 4-0. I mean, if Diogo Jota's playing the number 9, you'd probably expect that to be with the chances Nunes had. But I wouldn't say I'm worried at all by the performance. As I say, over the course of the season, it's a 55, 60 game season. You're not going to play every game as a 9 out of 10, a 10 out of 10. And sometimes you just kind of have to take those wins for what they are. A scrappy 1-0 win and you move on, especially this time, of year as well. And as I say, we've had a few injuries coming into it as well. A few players missing with illness and probably didn't have the squad they would have expected a few weeks ago. So I think, in the eyes of many, it was a kind of a tough trip. Navigate it quite well, and as I say, Slot might not be best pleased with it, but I'm sure in the grand scheme of things, 6 from 6 in the Champions League, you can't really complain, can you?
No, it's a perfect position, isn't it, really, for Liverpool at the moment, and things do seem to be ticking along quite nicely for them. But you mentioned Darwin Nunez there, a couple of missed chances from him. I think probably the majority of this podcast might be on him. We have touched a little bit on him in the last couple of weeks on this show. He always is a talking point one way or another. It's been a bit of a difficult period for him, hasn't it? And I think it probably isn't a great sign, I think, in the wider scheme of his Liverpool career, that this, I think it's fair to say, was a big opportunity for him. Diogo Jota is on the verge of a comeback, but he's been missing for quite a few games now. He's been out for a little while. Darwin Nunez has been playing consistently in that period, but since Diogo Jota got injured against Chelsea, he's actually been booked more times than he's found the back of the net for Liverpool, which I think sums it up quite neatly in terms of the struggles that he's got. The problem with him as well is that he's not necessarily doing the other stuff. That the pressing is there and the work is there, but he's not really bringing others into play. He's kind of caught between 2 different places at the moment. So what are your thoughts on Darwin Nunez at the moment? I think it's been fair to say that the Liverpool fan base generally has backed him even when he has struggled, but it does kind of feel to me like there's a bit of a consensus at the moment that he is struggling, and he certainly wouldn't be in the first choice team. As soon as Diogo Jota comes back, I'd expect him to go back straight into that first team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Nunes kind of, for the last 2.5 years since he's been at Liverpool, he is always a story. I mean, whether he scores or whether he doesn't, he's always going to create headlines. That's just the type of player he is. That's what happens when you arrive for a potential club record fee. So, I mean, the fact that we're talking about Nunes not in a positive light is, and it feels like we've kind of done that for most weeks, not us specifically, but, the kind of the wider media, that's kind of been a running theme of his Liverpool career of talking about maybe what could and should have been, as opposed to, what he's actually delivered. I think now he's at that stage where, he's in his 30s and at Liverpool. And yes, there was progress last year under Jurgen Klopp, but the fact a new manager came in with a slightly more conservative style, that kind of meant that it was back to the drawing board almost. It was a clean slate, and maybe that work that he did last season and those steps that he did take, he was almost regressed 12 months because it counts for nothing under Slot. It was, like I say, a different style of play. I mean, the thing I do worry about with Nunes is that I always thought when Jota a few years ago, when he went on a kind of a dry spell in front of goal, you could kind of see what he offered the team, and he was obviously working with his link-up play, and that I think improved tenfold, and his pressing obviously improves a lot as well. I just think with Nunes now, and don't get me wrong, the work rate's there, the endeavour's there, the fans and people at Anfield clearly love him, but in terms of looking at where he was 2.5 years ago to where he is now, I just don't see a great deal of improvement in terms of his overall play. And it is difficult because, you think of what Liverpool had before Nunes in terms of, Roberto Firmino, probably the most complete striker of his generation, was so silky, could score goals, could make assists, could probably play any position on the football pitch. He was such an intelligent footballer, and Nunes is just the complete other side of that spectrum. I mean, the game at Newcastle last week, we were just speaking about it before, weren't we, Matt? And I think his overall play that night was really shoddy as well. And because Liverpool dropped points in the end, it obviously gets highlighted more so than it would if Liverpool were to have held on and won 3-2. And whether that's, fair or unfair, I'm probably not the right person to say, but, being a number 9 for Liverpool, that shirt alone comes with huge criticism, and not criticism, but it comes with huge scrutiny, doesn't it? You've got to be scoring the goals week in, week out. Otherwise, you are going to be in the headlines. And as I say, I just look at him from where he was 2.5 years ago, and I just don't think he's developed enough. And I think it was quite telling as well that for the City game at Anfield a few weeks ago, that he did revert back to Luis Diaz in that kind of false 9 role. I think partly because of the system that we've got at the minute, with Liverpool and what Slot's doing. I think the fluidity of Diaz and kind of the interchangeability with Gakpo and sometimes Salah as well. I think that, whether Diaz is as, prolific, whether he has as many shots as Nunes or not, I think because he's interchangeable, he's a bit of a nuisance. He can go right, he can go left. It makes it hard for defenders. But as I say, I look at Nunes, I think he's very easy to mark. I don't think his kind of timing of runs is great. I don't think the runs he makes are great. I still don't think he's got a trademark finish. We see a lot of times that he drifts out to the left and he drifts out to the right, and those shots from the angles, he doesn't really have that low driven finish. It's all kind of just very much at the near post, straight to the goalkeeper. Whereas Diaz, he's got a bit of trickery. He can beat a man. He can do something different. And I just the more it goes on, the more I see kind of the positives of playing Diaz there instead. And I do wonder next season, if that's maybe a route that Slot will. When he has his, full pre-season, no international tournaments, he can sit down with his players. I wonder if that's a system he'll implement because, it seems that he really does like Gakpo on that left as well. Diaz obviously started the season really well, so you need to find a position for both of those players. They're both real big assets to Liverpool. And as I say, I just think it suits Liverpool a lot more because I think to kind of, especially in the system that Slot is implemented at Liverpool, you need to kind of be able to hold your line really well and time those runs. And as I say, I don't think Nunes has got the intelligence to do that. He's caught offside a hell of a lot of times. And I know that's obviously, part of that is being a striker. But for someone who's got so much pace, the amount of times that he is flagged up is pretty ridiculous, to be honest. So I do wonder if next season that's something he'll explore because, when you're playing the champions at home, which is, probably the biggest game of the season, the fact that, he was left on the bench, Jota wasn't fit. I think that's, a pretty big indictment. I think it's got to the stage with Jota as well, where as much as I think he's, Liverpool's best forward, I think he's one of the better forwards in the Premier League. I think you've probably got to look at him now as a luxury player, and he's not someone at the start of the season you can plan to have for 25, 30 games. You've probably just got to say, we almost plan for life without him and any games that we do get. So that begs the question as to, does he go? But I think in terms of Nunes, unless there's a real kind of, upsurge in his performances between now and the end of the season, I think a parting of ways, looks inevitable. I think maybe it's a time where Liverpool just cut their losses and kind of move on because I think the whole kind of fanfare that comes with Nunes as well, I don't think that's very helpful. As I say, whether he scores or not, he's a story. People always sing his name at Anfield, which is great, but I do wonder, he can't just be rotated like a Jota can. And you think, oh, well, that's just a tactical decision. If Nunes isn't in the team, it's a huge story. So I just think kind of at this stage now, for someone who costs 65 million quid and has a potential to cost 85 million quid, I just think that the negatives outweigh the positives in terms of his development, which is sad because I think last season he made some real great steps, but I think we saw in the title kind of running, from February, March onwards when he came back from injury, when he was missing chances and he was low on confidence, Liverpool really did suffer. And at the minute, it's fine because, Salah's playing well. He's getting the goals. Diaz is playing well. Gakpo's playing well. Szoboszlai's chipped in with a few goals as well. But, say if Salah was to go to, if it was a different season, he was to go to AFCON, Diaz was to get an injury, and all of a sudden you're relying solely on Nunes to win you a league title and you're neck and neck with City or an Arsenal. I think that could really be your downfall. We've seen with Arsenal over the last couple of years, that's been, the lack of having a killer number 9 has really cost them. And we've seen the other end of the spectrum with City having an Erling Haaland has, propelled them head and shoulders above everyone else. So I just think Liverpool need a change of approach, a change of tack. And as I say, at the minute, we've kind of seen Slot do that already with Diaz. Maybe that's a hint of what's to come, or maybe that's just Slot, working with his options. But the fact that he is, not selecting Nunes for his big games is, as I say, a pretty big indictment.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of that. I think if there was a Champions League final tomorrow and Liverpool were in it, I think if everyone's fit, your first choice number 9 would be Jota. Your second choice would probably be Diaz with Gakpo on the left. And maybe then you'd look to maybe have a third choice option of Darwin Nunez, which for a club record signing is probably not great 2.5 years into his Liverpool career. As you say, he's not really much different to when he first came in. There's certain elements of his game that you think maybe could have improved and got better, but generally speaking, it's not been a complete change. And I've heard quite a few people in the last few months say things along the lines of, well, if he wasn't a club record signing, if he hadn't cost £85 million, maybe we'd view him a little bit differently. But I think realistically, any player that Liverpool are going to buy is probably going to cost more than 30 million to get into that team. Mm-hmm. Let's just say that Liverpool had spent 35 million on Darwin Nunez. I think we're probably at the point now where we'd still be in a similar sort of situation where we'd be looking at him and thinking, is he the perfect thing? Now, obviously, the context of that is that you'd be able to cut your losses a little bit more easily. You'd be able to move him on more easily. You might be able to even make a profit on him potentially if you'd only spent 35 on him. But it's not really, for me, about the amount of money that Liverpool have spent on him means that you've got to stick with him or you've got to stay with him or you've got to find a way of making it work. I just think whatever money Liverpool have cost, he doesn't look particularly natural in the way that Liverpool want to play. And that's obviously partly down to the change of manager. I think it's probably partly down to it's just not quite worked in the way that they thought it would have done. I'm sure you were there for the Benfica games when he played against Liverpool, particularly at Anfield, and just looked a brilliant player, a brilliant finisher, was able to go through on goal and chip the ball over presumably Addison, I think it was, in the Liverpool goal. It's just not something that we've really seen from him so far in his Liverpool career. And I just wonder what the next step for him is, really. If he gets to the end of this season, do you think Liverpool have got a big decision to make in terms of not just bringing somebody else in potentially to come in and be that number 9, but potentially trying to find a buyer for him as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's 25 going on 26 next summer. So he's at that stage of his career where, he's no longer going to be viewed as a player who's, almost learning on the job. He'll be to, be a kind of a designated first choice somewhere else. And as we both said, I just can't see that happening at Liverpool. It's funny you say about that Benfica game because I was actually speaking to someone about that the other day and kind of the memories, especially the game at Anfield and to be fair, even the game at their place, the first leg. You think what was so good about Nunes and kind of he was able to use, all his attributes was how Benfica set up. And, Liverpool kind of penned them back for a lot of the game. And then they hit Liverpool out on the break, didn't they? And, he was able to use that, that pace and that power, his aerial prowess. But as I say, in a more kind of patient approach, a slower build-up kind of play, which Liverpool are doing now under Slot, I just don't think that really suits his game. So I think maybe from Nunes' part, he realises that as well. I think under Klopp as well, the fact that they were creating a lot of shots for him, a lot of chances, the games were a lot more open, it was end to end, that suited Nunes. But I don't think he'll be particularly enjoying this style of play because I just don't think it suits him. I don't think there's many number 9s, to be fair, that would be able to perform in this kind of Slot team. I think it takes a real intelligent forward to do that. Obviously, Jota, one of the best in the league in terms of, overall play, but also intelligence, timing runs, all kinds of finishes. I just think with Nunes, he's caught in this kind of catch-22, isn't he? Because he'll be wanting to prove people wrong and kind of, live up to this expectation. But at the same time, I think there's got to be a point where everyone looks at it and think, the longer it goes on, the more painful it kind of gets, really, and it kind of reflects badly on both players. If he goes into a fourth season next year and he's still only managing 10 goals a season, it's like you're going 26, going on 27, you've still not kicked on, you've maybe wasted a few years of your career, and for Liverpool, the longer it goes on, the longer they're reminded how much they spent on him. So as you say, Matt, I think a situation, unless he was to have a dramatic upturn in form in the new year and wins Liverpool the Champions League, the Premier League, the FA Cup, the League Cup, whatever else there is to win, that would be completely just to keep him. But as at this moment in time, when he's had a free run in the side almost with Jota being out, I just can't see him getting a run in the side if Jota was back in the new year. And to be honest, it wouldn't even surprise me if Liverpool were looking at forward reinforcements in the new year, just purely because if it got to this situation and this was the last 10 games of the season, how confident would you be? And whether Slot would like to admit it or not, I don't think you'd be too confident in Nunes. If you are playing FA Cup finals, Champions League finals, Premier League deciders. So it wouldn't surprise me if maybe they fast track that in the summer. I mean, we saw it before with Diaz. If the right person's there and they're available and they like him, they're more than happy to bring him in early. But I think certainly in the summer, it's got to be a position at Liverpool looking to kind of strengthen.
Yeah, Arne Slot in his press conference was very, very much positive around Darwin Nunez and pointed to a few other things, but I don't think we should read too much into that. I think he can't really say anything other than that with a player in that position. I think it's just a case of giving him as much confidence as possible, really. Yeah, I wanted to touch on Dominic Szoboszlai as well, because he's been a little bit of a talking point at the start of this season. Clearly, what he does in terms of his intensity and his running and his off-the-ball stuff is really, really impressive. Arne Slot has spoken a couple of times about wanting maybe a few more goals and assists and decisive moments from him in the final third as well. So where are you sort of at with him and that number 10 position? I think it's particularly interesting now that Harvey Elliott is back. There's another option to play there. Curtis Jones has been playing well in that position as well. What have you made of him this season, and do you think he's doing enough in terms of the on-the-ball stuff, even though it's quite clear that off the ball he is really valuable to Liverpool?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, actually, I've kind of almost changed my view on Szoboszlai in the last couple of weeks. I think off the back of that Southampton game, I think he's had a real upturn in form, on the ball. I think, off the ball all season, he's kind of been Liverpool's metronome, hasn't he? He's set the tone, he's kind of led the press. You think of all those years ago when Klopp first came in and it was Lallana, and there's that famous image, isn't there, at Tottenham when kind of Lallana, presses his guts out for 90 minutes and then he kind of falls into Klopp's arms. And that's almost a mantle that Szoboszlai's taken in this team under Slot. He's, as I say, led from the front. And even last night, when Slot's saying that a lot of players didn't really play with the same intensity that he expects, and the pressing, wasn't as good as it should have been, and people, weren't following up. It was Szoboszlai who was one of the only few who was, busting a gut kind of thing and making those runs forward and closing down and harrying defenders. And I think he's almost become his kind of way into the team, hasn't it? Because I think for a £60 million player, I think it's fair to say you would expect a few more goals and assists, especially because that's kind of how he made his name in Germany and, in the Red Bull kind of setup, and even with the national team, he was this kind of player, this box to box who could take dead ball situations. He could, finish attacks and, had a really clean strike on him. And we haven't really seen that too much, really. I can only think of that goal against Leicester last season where we've really seen Szoboszlai kind of let loose from range in a kind of Gerrard-esque fashion. But I think that goal against Southampton in the 3-2 win a few weeks ago, I think that really kind of, I wouldn't say kick-started him, but I think you could tell he was playing with the burden on his shoulder of having not scored and maybe not having assisted as many goals as he should have. But as soon as he kind of got that goal, and it was a good finish, to be fair, it feels like he's kind of built on that in the last couple of weeks, and he's done really well. He's an ever-present in this Liverpool team. I know he didn't play against Madrid, but he came in against Manchester City, and I thought he was absolutely flawless that day. I mean, it was a midfield of cities that was lacking legs, wasn't it? I mean, Gundogan, Bernardo Silva, Rico Lewis, Foden, and Matheus Nunes. So it was a bit of a makeshift midfield, not what you'd normally expect from Manchester City, but he certainly made Gundogan feel his age, I'm sure, in that midfield, the way he kind of pressed and harried him, and that was key to Liverpool creating so many chances, winning the ball back, and kind of dominating City from the off. So I think as long as the people around him are functioning and making those goals and assists up, almost in kind of Szoboszlai's absence, it's all right. But it worked on the clock, didn't it? You think of what the best midfield was. They got to a Champions League got to two Champions League finals in a row with, what people would describe. I think at one point was it the Brexit midfield they used to call it, and it was, you'd have like James Milner, Oxlade-Chamberlain, and Henderson. Then the season after it was, Fabinho, Wijnaldum, and Henderson, and even at their peak they didn't really chip in with too many goals. But because you had the front three of Firmino, Salah, Mane, in this case now you've got a front four. I think if you can almost do that dirty work so they don't have to, I think it's kind of a fair trade, and I think I'm all right with that. Of course, you would like to see him score a few more goals and get a few more assists, but as I say, I feel this midfield now has got a really nice balance to it. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Elliott coming back, because I think especially in the early weeks of the season, a lot of people are saying they would have liked to have seen Elliott, especially with how he finished last season. It felt like he was scoring and assisting every week from the bench. And I think he'd be a player who would really suit that number 10 role, actually, because he gives you the effort and endeavour that Szoboszlai does off the ball. But I think in possession he's really cute, and he's one of the few players in the Liverpool team I think is really good at breaking lines and receiving the ball on the half turn, and just being really cute and playing eye of the needle passes. So it will be interesting to see how Slot plays him now in the next couple of weeks. But I would suspect that it will be Szoboszlai for the near future, just because Elliott's been he's been out for such a long time. He only played a couple of minutes last night, so it's going to take him a while to kind of build up his fitness. And to be honest, I would be surprised to see Elliott kind of get continuous starts probably until like the end of January. And the FA Cup games come around and they offer a bit of a chance for him to rebuild his fitness, because at the minute this Liverpool team is playing so well, and it would be kind of foolish to change it. Of course, players are going to get leggy and feel tired and stuff, and you don't want to risk that. But as I say, the midfield feels like whoever you drop in, whether it be McAllister, Jones, Gravenberch, or Szoboszlai, whichever three of them are playing, they all complement each other really well. And a lot of that is down to Szoboszlai in the way he sets the tone.
Yeah, it's almost a different player for a different game. I think if it's Manchester City, as you say, you definitely would go with Szoboszlai. If it was the Nottingham Forest game, I think Liverpool really could have done with Harvey Elliott in that to try and break down that low block, but he wasn't available. And obviously we know the outcome of how that one finished. So maybe it'll be a little bit horses for courses in certain parts over the next few weeks. But we shall see what happens. We've talked about good and bad of Liverpool. Just to finish off, obviously, Liverpool are in a brilliant position in the Premier League, even though they didn't play. The weekend went really well for them in terms of Arsenal and Manchester City not winning in the Champions League, 6 out of 6, the only team to have a 100% record. Clearly, they're going to get through and probably in the top 8 spots, which is going to be a big boost in terms of not having to play the 2 extra matches in the new year. So I've phrased the question in quite a negative way in terms of what stops Liverpool from going all the way in the league or the Champions League. But I guess it's much easier to think of reasons why it will go well. So it's much quicker to go for things that maybe could potentially go wrong. Is there anything you're worried about in terms of Liverpool at this moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, obviously injuries is the big concern, and I think because of last season as well. And I mean, the one kind of caveat I would have to that is the style of play is obviously a lot more conservative this year. It's the energy is not as the energy that's been kind of dished out every game by every player is not as much. I'd be surprised I don't have them to hand, but the running stats I imagine are kind of less. So what are we now? 22 games into the season. Under Klopp, that might have felt to players like 35 games, but under Slot, it probably feels something closer to 10 or 11 games maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not a sports scientist, believe it or not, but kind of just looking with the naked eye, it does feel like, especially in the final, half an hour of games, there's been a lot more control. I know that hasn't been the case necessarily recently, but in the early weeks of the season, it felt very much like 1920 Liverpool as soon as Liverpool went kind of one goal ahead, it was like teams were kind of willing to kind of pack up and go home and prepare for next week. And, Liverpool obviously so good at keeping the ball now and not forcing attacks for the sake of it. I mean, even you think with the fullbacks that became before the injuries to Trent and before the injuries to Bradley, the final 20 minutes, it would be Bradley coming on and Tsimikas coming on kind of thing. So I think Slot's been really smart with his handling of the players and his managing of their minutes. But of course, as we saw last season, injuries are so unprecedented and all you need is 2 or 3. And I think Liverpool's squad I don't think it's paper thin, but they didn't add to it a great deal in the summer, did they? Obviously Federico Chiesa, the only player that, joined this summer. So, you do always have that in the back of your mind. I think as well, the midfield is the one area that I am concerned about. And I know I've just said in my previous answer that, it's kind of waxing lyrical about it. But I just think with Gravenberch, he's so instrumental to how Liverpool play, and he very much feels like one of a kind at the minute, just how kind of intelligent he is in terms with the ball and moves in tight spaces. He's so integral to kind of the start that Liverpool have made in all competitions. I just think to kind of ask him to go again every week is going to be tough. I thought last night might have been a game where you maybe sit him out, but I can understand with the derby being cancelled why he maybe wanted to, would have had the weekend off, so you maybe just say, look, get yourself back in the thick of it ahead of the weekend. But the fact he played 90 minutes was a bit like, oof. So I don't know. I just think they could do with a midfielder in January. And, I think if they got one over the line, whether that be a Zubimendi or someone else, but someone of that profile who can maybe alternate with Gravenberch as you say, maybe horses for courses. Someone who maybe if you were going to Man City away in April time, who's maybe a bit more defensively solid, maybe not as good on the ball, but maybe more of a Fabinho type player than he is a Gravenberch, if you know what I mean. That's the kind of player I would like to see Liverpool play, because it feels like kind of all areas of the field, they have got Swiss Army knife options in, as you say, horses for courses. It doesn't feel like there's a set midfield or a set attack. It's very much, what the opposition are doing and work backwards. But as I say, just that midfield does look quite thin because three of them are always going to be playing. Okay, add Elliott into that, it's 3 from 5, but for the last 3-4 months, it's been 3 from 4, which is obviously always going to take its toll. The games coming up between now and the end of the month, I know, obviously in all competitions, if you include last night, but there's a lot of travelling in there. There's some favourable home games, Leicester and Fulham, of course, but I think going to Spurs and going to West Ham, I think that'll be a week that Liverpool really do feel in their legs. I mean, we saw at Newcastle last week that I thought the midfield, I know you were there, Matt, it felt really leggy, didn't it? And Newcastle...
Yeah, Gravenberch as well.
Yeah, and as I say, he looked better last night because he had the weekend off, but I imagine he would have played the derby if the derby was, ahead. Obviously, McAllister would have been suspended, so obviously then McAllister was suspended for last night as well, so would Gravenberch have had to play the derby, Newcastle Saturday, Wednesday or Tuesday kind of thing, so that's what I am worried about. And I think when you go to Tottenham, a big pitch, West Ham as well, a big pitch, a team fighting for their lives, at the bottom, it's I think that's when Liverpool could really feel this, and then hopefully, as I say, they can get kind of through these next couple of weeks and maybe reinforcements. But as we saw in the summer, I don't think Liverpool will sign someone for the sake of signing someone. Clear that Slot believes in the squad and believes in the coaching of the players. So it would have to be, I think the term in the summer was opportunistic, wasn't it, in terms of signing? So, maybe something does present itself. But I just think that's my only worry. I think fullback, you've got Gomez who can do there. I know he hasn't done him a great deal. Probably sees him more as a centre-back than he is a right-back. I think Bradley's been impeccable whenever he's come in. So I'm not too worried about, that alternation with Trent. I think Tsimikas has probably been as good as he's been in his Liverpool career. He's kind of running Robertson as close as he ever has. And then I think, obviously, the centre-halves. I know he hasn't played Kwanzaa a great deal, but you've still got him, Gomez, Konate, when back and fit. So I think you've got options there. And then with the forward line, Jota hopefully coming back soon. I think there's options there, but it's just that midfield that I just think is a bit too short.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think that the worry really in terms of January is, if Martin Zubimendi hasn't changed his mind about coming to a team outside of Spain, then possibly there might not be another obvious option for them to go for. But I'm sure we will talk plenty about the January transfer window and, of course, next summer as well. There's contracts and all sorts of things for Liverpool to get sorted out. But as we've said, things are going pretty well. We'll be back next week with the Liverpool.com podcast. I'm sure we'll mention the game against Fulham at the weekend. There's plenty more games coming up as well. Another trip to Southampton next midweek. So plenty of fixtures to get stuck into. But thank you very much for this week, Keifer, for joining me, for you guys at home as well, for watching along and listening. We'll be back next week on the Blood Red channel.